we've gone through the reproductive systems of male and female, and then today is really just talk about pregnancy and development. And your book goes into this in a lot more detail than I think you need at this point. So I kind of went through and kind of distilled it down, okay? You have like 30, I think there's like 34 slides on there, 34 slides. Most of them are text slides, and we're gonna go through them pretty quickly, okay? Basically today we're gonna talk about pregnancy, starting at fertilization, okay, how the sperm and egg come together, and then we'll take it a general discussion about development, and then the end point of pregnancy, what happens to mom, and then labor. Okay? So pregnancy is considered to be the time of fertilization, okay, until the infant is born. So how many months are women pregnant?
9.
Wrong. 10 months. Okay? 10 months. About 10 and a half. Because you actually are already pregnant. Females are pregnant at the time at the time of their first missed menstrual cycle. That was the beginning, but conception actually occurred almost 2 weeks before that. Okay? And then there's 10 months after that. So it's actually like 10 and a half months. Okay? So some terminology: conceptus is a developing offspring. You could talk about an embryo is the terminology for the conceptus up until week 8. And then after that, it is a growing fetus. Right? So your gestational period, if we take it from our last date of last period, or the first day of our would have been the female's first missed menstrual cycle to birth, is roughly 280 days. Okay? Roughly 280 days, about 9.5 to 10 months. Okay? So, here's what it looks like. Fertilization, this little bitty thing. 1 week conceptus, 3 week embryo, 5 week embryo, and then 8 week embryo. And then after about 12 weeks, the fetus, by about 8 weeks, all the organs are in place. Then there's just development of the nervous system, and then growth of the baby after about 12 weeks. Okay? Pregnancy is broken down into trimesters, right? First, second, third. Okay? Now, very few people even know that they're pregnant by the time 1 week conceptus is, or a 3 week embryo. Okay? I was lucky enough with my first daughter that my wife's first day of her first missed period was actually the day after, or that was scheduled to be her annual gynecological exam. So we found out she was pregnant and went in there and we had our first ultrasound. I have a picture of my daughter at 4.5 weeks embryo, and it's a little bitty grain of rice. She's about 4.5 millimeters old, big. She's about 4.5 millimeters old, yeah. She's about, there's a very small amniotic sac. It's basically what you're looking at in that 3 week embryo picture, right, on ultrasound, okay? And normally ultrasounds aren't done until about 12 weeks when you look at everything all in place, okay? So accomplishing fertilization. There are obstacles that have to be overcome for fertilization to occur. And I'm going to tell you that getting pregnant and establishing pregnancy is not easy to do, okay? So first off, the oocyte after ovulation is viable, meaning that it can be fertilized for a period of 12 to 24 hours. So 1 day, you have a 1 day window, roughly, okay? Sperm also are viable 24 to 48 hours. So in order for fertilization to occur, sperm have to be deposited in the female reproductive tract the day before ovulation or the day of ovulation. Okay? All right, right within that couple hour window. Okay? and sperm there make their way to the uterine tube for fertilization to be possible. Sperm do not get there just by swimming. Okay? They do not get there just by swimming. There are compounds within the semen, the seminal fluid, that actually induce contraction of the female reproductive tract, and they kind of help sperm move through the uterus, the vagina and the uterus on their own. Fertilization occurs within the fallopian tube. Okay? So sperm reach the oocyte, and sperm break down the follicle cells. Remember that the oocyte was ovulated with cells surrounding it. What's the name of the cells surrounding the oocyte? What do we call that? Danny, Kyla, come on. Huh? Those are granulosa cells, yes. What is it called, though? It kind of look like a crown. Corona. What? Corona radiata. So they have to actually get through those cells. And then there's an enzymatic reaction that occurs between the acrosome cap of the sperm and the zona pellucida. Right? There's a protein-protein interaction, breaks down the shell, digests the hole in the membrane, and then the nucleus of the sperm enters, and you have fertilization. Okay? Once contact is made and that enzymatic reaction occurs, no other sperm can attach. Okay? So what ends up happening is a calcium release across the membrane of the egg, and that calcium ion influx changes the structure of the membrane receptors, and it prevents sperm from attaching anymore. Right? So it's a way of preventing multiple sperm to fertilize an egg. Okay? So that doesn't occur, and then what do you end up with? And then you have a sharing of genetic material. Nucleus from the sperm, 23 chromosomes from dad, 23 chromosomes from mom within the nucleus of the egg. And now, when that occurs, the oocyte completes meiosis, and then we have the formation of a zygote, a diploid organism. Okay? The zygote is the first cell of the new individual. Okay? And it results from fusion of egg and sperm DNA. Okay? Immediately, the zygote starts mitotic divisions. Okay? In this stage, the zygote is actually still within, right? So here's, the zygote is actually still within the zona pellucida. So this in red is your 2N, okay? And it will start to have very rapid mitotic divisions without growing in size, okay? This is what we call cleavage, okay? The first couple rounds of mitotic divisions, of growth, is cleavage, okay? They're going to happen right away. So now this is this one cell is going to become a 2 cell, and then will become 4 cells. Eventually, next it's going to be 8 cells. Okay? But within that is still within what's called the zona pellucida. And it's not growing in size, it's just rapid divisions. And at some point, those divisions keep going up until 256 cells or so. And then there's a change that occurs. And that embryo is what we call hatches. It gets its way out of, it dissolves the zona pellucida, and it hatches out of that shell, okay, per se, okay? And at that time, when it leaves the zona pellucida, there's an influx of fluid, okay? It becomes what's called a blastocyst, okay? So 3 to 4 days after ovulation, floats around, and you end up with this blastocyst. A blastocyst is like a ball, so from the outside would look like this. It's like this big It's a ball of cells. Okay? But if you cut it in half, it actually looks like this. There's a big ball of cells, and then there's this other part. And all in here, in the middle, in this, okay, that's what we call the blastocoele. Okay? It's a cavity where the cells have brought in water and now have separated out the different parts of the, it's not just all the cells are the same anymore, there's a little bit difference. Okay? So the blastocyst is a different stage. Okay? And within the blastocyst you have this area right here, okay, which is called the inner cell mass. And that will end up becoming, let's say, the fetus. That ends up becoming the animal, the human, the being. Okay? All this other stuff, the other, we call trophoblast cells that are out here. That ends up contributing to the placenta. Okay? So part of this is all, so it's not just the placenta is not just maternal tissue. It's actually a fusion between maternal tissue and embryonic tissue. Okay? The inner cell mass, and that's what you actually take and you get embryonic stem cells from. Okay? That is what ends up becoming the conceptus and the later on. Okay? So here's kind of the process. Zygote, 4 cells. Eventually you end up with a morula. A morula is a ball of cells. Okay? A solid ball of what we call blastomeres. If I was to take one of those out, it could end up, and they could be stem cells as well. Okay? Then the morula hollows out and fills with fluid. About 4 days, that becomes a blastocyst, right? And that blastocyst then implants. And part of the blastocyst will attach to the layers of the endometrium. The inside, the inner cell mass will end up becoming the baby, okay? And the trophoblast, they becomes part of the placenta, okay? Now, implantation in humans is an invasive process, okay? So there's enzymes that break down and disrupt the tissue of the endometrium so that there's a sharing of blood supply that's present, okay? So your morula is a 16-cell stage, and then the blastocyst, or also known as the chorionic vesicle, because the chorion is that fluid that's on the inside. Okay, it's a hollow ball-like cells, ball-like structure of cells. Okay, and then from week 9 until birth, we'll call it a fetus. So we've gone from conceptus, right? So conceptus or zygote to embryo, to a blastocyst, and now we're at a fetus. Okay? So cleavage is, we went over cleavage, right? The blastocyst, what it is, trophoblast. All right, the blastocyst itself, when that inner cell mass, okay, that inner cell mass of the blastocyst is what will make up the human, okay? And at that time, within the inner cell mass, and during this, there's another movement of cells. Those cells move around, okay? And they kind of they change their orientation, and now they've developed layers. There's some that are on the outside, there's some that are on the inside, and there's some that are in the middle, okay? And those layers are important. Where they are is important because now they're going to behave differently than other cells, okay? And these are what we call germ layers: ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. The endoderm end up becoming all the epithelial cells on the inside of the body, okay? The mesoderm end up becoming bones and muscle and connective tissue, stuff that's in the middle, okay? Think about endoderm as being your gastrointestinal tract, GI tract, okay? And then the ectoderm is a lot of the epithelial tissue that is on the outside of the body. Okay, the skin is ectoderm, in origin, and the nervous system. Okay, the nervous system. Right, the brain and spinal cord is actually derived from ectoderm tissue. Right, so it starts on the outside and then it actually goes in. Okay, so when you have this blastocyst, there's this kind of movement of cells. The cells move what we call gastrulation. Right, so you have these steps in development. You have blastulation, where the cell goes from a ball of cells to having that cavity inside, and then gastrulation is now the formation of that tube. Yes.
What did you say the mesoderm becomes?
Bones and muscle. Okay, so gastrulation ends up forming your GI tract, Mike.
Are the bones and muscle derived from the mesoderm?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we talk about ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm as being embryonic tissues. All right, and they will give rise to what your tissues that we've talked about. Right, but they are at certain times they stop being defined as these tissues. They're no longer mesoderm; they're muscle. All right. Well, where's school? You have that written down: ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. What they become. Okay, so ectoderm, nervous and epithelial skin. Endotherm, mucosa. Right. So think about mucosal lining. Gastrointestinal tract, the respiratory tract. Wherever there's a mucous membrane, right, you consider that to be endoderm. Glands, right, such as sweat glands, are endoderm in nature. And mesoderm is everything else. So this is what it looks like. Okay? So you have in the middle up here, in the middle, this is the inner cell mass, and these are your three germ layers. You have yellow, right, blue, and red. That right there is the embryo. All of this out here is the chorionic villi, and this is what is going to implant into the endometrium, and all of this will become placenta. This part right here becomes the embryo. Okay? Well, is the embryo and becomes later on. All right, forming those ectoderm and endoderm in nature. And I'm sure, does the slide look like this, or can you read it? You can read it? Okay, good. All right, so the chorionic villi are those projections. All right, and then you have the amnion and the formation of the umbilical cord. Right, the umbilical cord are blood vessels, right, and the attachment between mom and fetus, right, through the placenta. This is what it looks like. Okay, so here on the left, what you have is the fetus that's been, you have the membrane is still intact, okay, and the chorionic villi are extending out. You can see the umbilical cord, and the umbilical cord comes out and attaches to the placenta, right? And all of this can be considered the placenta that's been removed around, right? There's a remnant of a yolk sac. Okay, you can actually see the formation of the head and eyes and so on. Okay, questions? Yes, Joe.
How many weeks of development?
What do you think? It's about 12 weeks, maybe a little bit earlier. Okay. The placenta, it forms a barrier between mom and embryo. Blood is not exchanged, but gas and nutrients and waste are. Okay, and there are elements of the blood that can get from one place to another. Antibodies can get from one place to another. Okay? Sometimes there's been research that's shown that moms who have given birth to sons have shown Y chromosome DNA in their glands later after giving birth to sons. Now they shouldn't have that, right? Where does it come from? It actually comes from developing fetus. All right? So the placenta takes over. After a period of time, when pregnancy has been established, the corpus luteum within the ovary regresses. It no longer produces progesterone. Now everything, all those steroid hormones that are maintaining pregnancy are coming from the placenta. They produce estrogen, progesterone, and some other hormones that maintain pregnancy. Okay, they don't produce LH or FSH, but estrogen, progesterone are important. Oxytocin comes from the brain. There's prolactin, and there's some other hormones that are important. Okay, by about the 9th week, all organ systems are present. Activities, the neurons start to fire, right? Basically now it's just growth and organization, and organ specialization, okay? This is 9th week is about what? About the end of the first trimester, okay? So there's all this, a lot of changes that are ongoing in the embryo, right? Development of the placenta. The first trimester is also most of the changes that are happening in the mom, okay? In the female. All right, by about the 2nd trimester, it's just growth, and now morning sickness goes away. All right, and the 2nd trimester is when people have that kind of baby glow. Yay, right? Yay. And then the 3rd trimester, like, I'm done. Okay, we'll talk about that in a little bit. All right, so look at what the fetus looks like in the 2nd trimester and the 3rd trimester. All right, as it eventually the fetus runs out of space. Okay, so females, ladies, thank you. Okay, first off, having 2 sisters, being raised by my mom, and having an aunt with 3 female daughters that were very close to my family, and then having now 2 daughters. Thank you. Okay, and having seen this happen in my mom and my wife twice, thank you. Okay, so I will say this, pregnancy wreaks havoc on a female's body. It is uncomfortable. It's hard. At times it's painful. It's nauseating. Okay? In the end, it's all worth it. Okay? I will say that. So, anatomical changes occur. Obviously, enlargement of the uterus to provide a house, for the developing conceptus, right? Eventually, as there's a change in center of gravity, okay? And so there's lordosis that occurs. As the uterus gets larger, as the fetus gets larger, right? It takes up spaces in the abdomen. It protrudes forward, and in order to adjust for that change in weight, a woman has lordosis, a sway back there, and exaggerated curvature of the lumbar spine, okay? And they'll have the pregnancy walk, okay? And with this, there's also relaxation of the pelvic ligaments, again, preparing for eventual childbirth. The pubic symphysis, right, is broken down, and that's as it relaxes, you get spreading of the hips in order eventually for childbirth to occur, okay? But it really, at first, it's to accommodate the change in weight shift, right, and how weight is transferred throughout the body, okay? So before conception, all right, what you have anatomical, the uterus expands, okay, and actually comes forward and then expands and grows superiorly, right, the fundus, and that also pushes on the other organs of the abdomen. It causes the bladder to have less space, right? What do you know about one of the characteristics of pregnant women? What do they have to do all the time? They got to pee, okay? And they got to pee. Because if a baby moves a certain way, puts pressure on the bladder, you got to pee, and you got to pee now, okay? So, also, it slows down motility of the gastrointestinal tract, okay? So women tend to have, they get constipated, right? And they have, the stomach is pushed up. They end up getting heartburn, okay? So those digestive organs are also compromised and changed, okay? Over time, you have growth of the breasts in response to hormones and in preparation for lactation after birth, okay? So gastrointestinal changes. In the first trimester, one of the biggest ones is the nauseating fact, the fact that morning sickness happens, okay? And sometimes the only thing that a woman could eat is Pop-Tarts in order to just not throw up, okay? And that happens, all right? there's a change in hormones that are ongoing that play into this. All right, elevated progesterone and estrogen that's being produced, and it nauseates, right? The smell of food. Okay. Typically, women will have an increased sense of smell, right, during or at the beginning of pregnancy, right? And they react to those smells in certain ways, okay? Heartburn, constipation, right? Cravings occur, usually in the second trimester, right, where you just want something, and that's what you're going to get, okay? Urinary system. Also, another reason why women urinate often during pregnancy, the kidneys are working double time. They are also cleaning out the blood they're excreting wastes from the mom and from the fetus. Okay? So that's a secondary or another response. They produce more urine, right? And they have less area to store it, so they have to go a lot. Okay? And it actually could cause some stress incontinence as well. It'll hold the urine. The respiratory changes, okay? Nasal mucosa becomes congested and swollen. The reason why the nasal actually is, most of the parts of the nasal mucosa are actually derived from they're hormonally responsive, okay? And so they'll become congested and swollen in response to the change in hormones, right? Vital capacity and respiratory rate increase, right? Use more of your lung capacity because you're also switching oxygen, you're exchanging oxygen for the growing fetus as well, right? Difficulty breathing because of that compression on the diaphragm from the growing uterus, especially during the late stages of pregnancy, and then there's sleep problems and everything else, okay? Blood volume increases, so heart rate increases, cardiac output increases, right? So this is a taxing event that happens, right? Women's bodies work hard to have and house a growing fetus, okay? So, guys, when you are, like Mother's Day is coming up next week, right? This weekend or next weekend, say thank you, Mom. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm sorry for anything I ever did to disrespect you because you're awesome because of this, okay? Varicose veins are also common, especially in the legs. All right? What do we end up with after those trimesters? Pregnancy ends in parturition, what we call parturition childbirth. All right? And labor is the actual act of expelling the fetus from the uterus. Okay? Before that, you could have some contractions of the uterus, what we call Braxton Hicks contractions, which are small, unsustained contractions, and they kind of like worrisome when you don't know what they are. Like, so the first time pregnancy and you get them, you're like, oh, whoa, what's going on? Well, not me. I mean, I don't know. But my wife was like, I don't know what that is. Then you go to the doctor, she's like, oh, those are common, Braxton Hicks. They're just, your uterus is expanding and kind of reacting to it. But you're okay, okay? You'll know when it's time to have the baby, okay? During labor, the uterus contracts, the myometrium of the uterus contracts, and it expels the baby from the uterus. And this is a rhythmic expulsive contractions, right? And they're sustained. And this operates under a positive feedback mechanism, okay? So you have Braxton Hicks, and then this is the real stuff. This positive feedback mechanism starts with a stimulus, all right? Eventually what happens? Fetus grows and becomes too big and takes up space. Over time, during the last trimester, the cervix, what we call effaces, it gets smaller, it reduces in size, and actually dilates, opens to 10 centimeters. Okay? The fetus moves in the womb, and the head is positioned down. It runs out of space and it puts pressure on the cervix. That's the stimulus. Okay? Baroreceptors in the cervix feel that pressure, that stimulus is recognized by those receptors. That signal is sent to the brain, and the brain responds by releasing oxytocin. Oxytocin then stimulates the uterus, the myometrium of the uterus, to contract. When it contracts, it further pushes the fetus down on the cervix, pushing more pressure. So it augments the stimulus, and now we continue that. All right, so what do we know about contractions? What happens to contractions? They get worse. Okay? They get stronger, and they get closer together. That is the result of a positive feedback mechanism. All right, the first one, okay, little contraction, it pushes the stimulus, release of oxytocin. A little while later, we're going to do that again. We're going to continue to do that until those contractions get really, really close. All right, estrogen is involved with this. The uterine contractions begin. The placenta releases prostaglandins, and then the big one is your oxytocin that's released from the pituitary. Okay, that all together produce contractions. Now, oxytocin is the biggest contributor to this. Okay, so this is what it looks like. Okay, this is the picture from your book. Right, so stimulus, dilating cervix, initiate nerve signals, goes to placenta, oxytocin from the mother, right? And then this affects through, and there's more stimuli that are involved. I want to simplify it down. Okay, pressure on the cervix is the stimulus. Okay, the movement goes to the brain to release oxytocin, cause uterine contractions, and further increase the stimulus. Okay, there are some positive other players in this. The fetus itself, right, helps initiate childbirth. Okay, what does this end with? Remember, a positive feedback mechanism has to have a definitive endpoint. What's the endpoint? Baby's born. Okay? Is there any more pressure on the cervix once the baby's born? No. Okay? So that's the endpoint. Okay? So positive feedback mechanism results in the fetus being expulsed from the uterus. Now, dilation, right? The cervix becomes dilated. It's fully dilated at 10 centimeters. That's about 10 centimeters. That is about 2.5 inches, is 10 centimeters. That is what the infant is going to pass through. Okay? Not only that, then it has to pass through the opening of the hips. Okay? If you ever have a chance to witness this, like men, if you ever have, like, you have newfound respect to everything that a woman does. Okay? So the cervix softens, effaces, and thins, and eventually, one of the biggest signs of birth is water breaking. Okay, that happens when the amnion, one of the membranes that surround the growing fetus, breaks, and the amniotic fluid rushes out. That is what water breaking is. Okay, dilation is one stage of labor, and that's about the longest stage. Okay. There's dilation of the cervix. You can see it. This is the cervix right here. It thins and it actually opens and dilates. And then expulsion. Okay? Expulsion is really the act of pushing. Okay? So all of this is led up to, right? So the more contractions, the cervix effaces, et cetera, et cetera. Now, expulsion is the pushing part, and it can last as long as 2 hours. Usually it's pretty short. So we're saying this period in time is pretty short. Okay? The first pregnancy is usually longer than the subsequent ones, because now those muscles, etc., have already responded to this once. Okay? Normal delivery is head first, what we call vertex position, and breech delivery is butts first. A lot of times, what a gyneco obstetrician at this point, OBGYN, will do is manually go in and try to push the baby around. If he or she is coming out breech position, right? They can manually try to move her. All right. So usually comes out crown and then head face down. Expulsion as it comes through the birth canal. Okay, and then the last stage is placenta stage. After birth of the infant, dad gets the lovely thing of cutting the cord, or whoever's there, or the doctor, and then after that, the placenta separates from the lining of the uterus, and those attached, the placenta and the other associated fetal membranes are passed. Right, so that's important to have that come out because these are hormonally responsive tissues. If they stay, there's risk of endometriosis, of toxic shock syndrome, a bunch of other things that are associated with retained membranes. Okay, and postpartum bleeding is present. 5 to 8 days later, there's bleeding that occurs from the female. Right, as those membranes are repositioning themselves. So the placenta separates away and then is delivered on its own. Questions on delivery or labor and pregnancy? Okay? Cannot stress enough that this is really, really hard on females' bodies. Right, and lasting changes that occur. In some cases, this is vaginal birth. Vaginal birth isn't allowed, or is not necessary, or a female can't complete it. If that's the case, then they will deliver. They will have surgically open the uterus and deliver the baby by cesarean section. Both of mine were born by cesarean section. Okay, it's a transverse cut just below the bikini line, opens up, and then pops the membranes, and out comes baby. It's not much to it. Cesarean section rather than vaginal birth. If you have a cesarean section first, there is likelihood that you have a cesarean section again. There is what we call VBAC, or vaginal birth after cesarean section. So you could actually have a vaginal birth afterwards, right? But the likelihood of that happening is reduced. But have an experienced gynecologist there if you're doing it. Questions? Okay, so yes, Daniel.
I have a question about the final.
Okay, we'll wait on that in a minute. Okay. Questions on pregnancy and development? All right, so that stuff will be on your final